The explosion threw Lieutenant Daniel Cole against the shuttle wall so hard that he saw stars dancing in front of his eyes. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, and the computer voice kept repeating that the hull was breaking apart. Daniel grabbed onto the pilot seat and pulled himself forward as the shuttle spun wildly through space. Outside the cracked window, he could see the barren surface of a gray moon rushing toward him at terrible speed. He was 34 years old and had served as a field medic for 8 years in the patrol vessel Horizon's Edge. He had seen many terrible things in the Cold War between humanity and the Dominion. He had lost friends and saved strangers, and watched good soldiers die for reasons that politicians could never explain. But he had never felt so alone as he did in that spinning shuttle with death rushing up to meet him. Daniel managed to strap himself into the pilot seat just before the shuttle hit the ground. The impact was like being punched by a giant. Metal screamed and tore and sparks flew everywhere. The shuttle bounced once and then twice and then slid across the rocky surface for what felt like forever. When it finally stopped moving, Daniel hung upside down in his seat with blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. He was alive. That simple fact seemed impossible, but it was true. Daniel unbuckled himself and fell to the ceiling that was now the floor. Every part of his body hurt, but nothing seemed broken. His medical training had taught him to check himself first before helping others. He ran his hands over his arms and legs and chest and found only bruises and small cuts. The universe had decided to let him live a little longer. The shuttle door was jammed, but Daniel kicked it open after 5 hard tries. The moon had a thin atmosphere that smelled like copper and dust. The sky was dark purple and filled with distant stars. Daniel stepped outside and looked around at the rocky wasteland that would probably become his grave. His emergency beacon was working, but rescue could take hours or even days. He had water for 3 days and food for 2. He had his medical kit and his sidearm and not much else. That was when he saw the other ship. It had crashed about 200 meters away, and it was clearly not human. The design was elegant and curved with a dark purple hull that seemed to absorb light. Daniel recognized it immediately as the enemy, the aliens that humanity had been fighting for 3 years in a Cold War that grew hotter every month. He should have walked in the other direction. He should have hidden and waited for human rescue. Any sensible soldier would have done exactly that. But Daniel was a medic first and a soldier second. He could see smoke rising from the crashed ship. He could see that the hull was cracked open. If there were survivors, then they were probably injured. His feet started moving before his brain could stop them. The ship was badly damaged. Daniel climbed through a gap in the hull and found himself in a corridor lit by flickering emergency lights. The air inside smelled strange and sweet like alien flowers. He moved carefully with his hand on his sidearm, even though he knew that shooting anything would probably be a mistake. The corridor led him to what looked like a passenger compartment. That was where he found them. A guardian lay against the wall in a pool of purple blood. She was still alive, but barely. Her 4 arms hung limp and her compound eyes were cloudy with pain. She was holding something against her chest, protecting something. Daniel moved closer and saw that it was a child. The child was small and delicate with a carapace that had distinctive golden markings. Her eyes were closed and her breathing was shallow. Daniel could see that she had suffered severe injuries from the crash. Without medical attention, she would die within the hour. The guardian saw Daniel and tried to raise one of her arms in defense, but she was too weak. Daniel held up his hands to show he meant no harm. The guardian stared at him for a long moment. Then she spoke in broken human standard. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Air," she said. "Protect, please." Guardian's eyes went dark. Her arms fell to her sides. She was dead. Daniel knelt beside the child and opened his medical kit. His hands moved automatically as he checked her vital signs and assessed her injuries. She had internal bleeding and a cracked carapace and possible damage to her respiratory system. Biology was different from human biology, but the principles of emergency medicine were universal. Stop the bleeding. Stabilize the patient. Keep them alive until better help arrives. Daniel worked for 20 minutes straight. He used all of his emergency supplies and improvised with materials from the crashed ship. The child's golden markings seemed to glow faintly as he worked, and he wondered what they meant. He wondered who she was. The guardian had called her heir, but heir to what? Daniel pushed those questions aside and focused on keeping the small alien creature alive. When he finally finished, the child was stable but still unconscious. Her breathing was stronger and her vital signs were improving. Daniel sat back and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He had saved her. A child. An enemy. He had used all of his medical supplies to save someone that his own government would probably want dead. He did not regret it for a single second. That was when he heard the ships approaching. Daniel stepped outside the crashed vessel and looked up at the purple sky. He could see two sets of vessels descending toward the moon. One set was human, the familiar shapes of rescue shuttles from the horizon's edge. The other set was warships with weapons that could turn this entire moon into dust. Both groups had detected the crash, and both groups were coming to investigate. Daniel looked down at the unconscious child in his arms. She was so small and fragile. Her golden markings caught the light of the distant stars. He did not know yet that he was holding Princess. He did not know that she was the only daughter of Queen the Unconquered. He did not know that he had just saved the most important child in the entire Dominion. All he knew was that he had done the right thing. The ships were landing now, human soldiers on one side and warriors on the other. Daniel stood in the middle with the princess in his arms. He had no idea what would happen next. He only knew that he would protect this child no matter what. She was hurt and she was young and nothing else mattered. The universe was about to change forever, and it all started with one human medic who could not walk away from a wounded child. The warriors formed a half circle on one side of Daniel, while the human soldiers formed a half circle on the other side. Everyone had weapons drawn and everyone was shouting. The air crackled with tension, and the threat of violence hung over the rocky wasteland like a storm cloud. Daniel stood perfectly still with the unconscious princess cradled against his chest. He knew that one wrong move would turn this standoff into a massacre. Commander Lisa Grant pushed through the human line and stepped forward. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. Daniel had served under her for 3 years, and he trusted her with his life. But right now she was looking at him like he had lost his mind. "Lieutenant Cole," she said in a voice tight with controlled anger, "what exactly are you doing with that alien child?" Before Daniel could answer, a massive warrior stepped forward from the opposite line. He was larger than any Daniel had ever seen, with a carapace covered in battle scars and medals of honor. His forearms were thick with muscle, and his compound eyes burned with barely controlled rage. This was War Commander, and he was one of the most feared warriors in the entire Dominion. "Human," growled through his translator device, "you will hand over the princess immediately or every one of your soldiers will die." Commander Grant raised her weapon and pointed it directly at. "You fire one shot and this moon becomes a war zone. Do you really want to start a full conflict over one child?" "She is not just a child," replied. "She is the heir to the throne, the daughter of Queen. You have taken the most precious thing in our entire civilization." Daniel felt his stomach drop. The princess, the daughter of the Queen. He had not just saved any child. He had saved the most important child in their entire species. No wonder the Guardian had called her heir with her dying breath. No wonder a war fleet had come to investigate the crash. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. "I did not take her," Daniel said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "I saved her. She was dying and I saved her life." Turned his burning eyes toward Daniel. "You lie. Humans do not save. Humans only kill and destroy." "Then why is she still breathing?" Daniel asked. "Why did I use all of my medical supplies to keep her alive? Look at her. Look at the bandages. Look at the healing patches. I could have walked away, but I chose to save her instead." The warriors shifted uneasily. They could see the human medical supplies wrapped around the princess. They could see that her breathing was stable and her color was good. The evidence was impossible to deny, even if the conclusion seemed impossible to believe. That was when the princess opened her eyes. She looked up at Daniel with large golden eyes that matched the markings on her carapace. She was confused and frightened and in pain. But when she saw Daniel's face, she did not scream or struggle. Instead, she wrapped her small arms around his neck and held on tight. Her translator device activated and picked up her soft words. "Warm One saved me," she said. "Warm One is safe." The effect of those words was immediate and profound. Every warrior froze in place. Their weapons lowered slightly, even seemed stunned into silence. Daniel did not understand what was happening, but he could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Something important had just occurred. An older with ceremonial robes stepped forward from behind the warriors. He was clearly some kind of advisor or priest. His voice was calm and measured when he spoke. "The princess has spoken. She has acknowledged this human as her savior. By the ancient law of Ara, her words have bound their fates together. No may harm him now without violating sacred tradition. Snarled in frustration. This is absurd. He is a human, an enemy. The law was not meant for creatures like him. The law does not distinguish between species, the advisor replied firmly. A life debt is a life debt. The princess has spoken before witnesses. It cannot be undone. Commander Grant lowered her weapon slightly. What exactly does this mean for my officer? The advisor turned to face her. It means that Lieutenant Daniel Cole has earned the protection of the royal house. It also means that he has created a debt that must be addressed. Queen herself will decide how to proceed. As if summoned by those words, a massive shadow fell across the moon. Everyone looked up to see an enormous ship emerging from hyperspace. It was the largest vessel Daniel had ever seen, with elegant curves and weapons that could destroy entire planets. The royal flagship of Queen the Unconquered. The Queen herself had come. A shuttle descended from the flagship and landed nearby. The doors opened, and a squad of elite royal guards emerged. They were followed by a female who carried herself with absolute authority. She was not the Queen, but she was clearly someone of immense importance. I am First Minister, she announced. I speak with the voice of the Queen. Which human is responsible for saving the princess? Daniel stepped forward with the princess still clinging to his neck. I am Lieutenant Daniel Cole, field medic. Studied him with unreadable eyes. The Queen demands your presence on the royal flagship. You will come alone. Your commander may send a diplomatic observer, but you will answer to Queen personally. Commander Grant started to protest, but Daniel raised his hand. I will go. If this can prevent a war, then I have to try. The princess looked up at Daniel with trusting eyes. Warm one comes with me. Warm one meets mother. Daniel nodded, even though his heart was pounding with fear. He was about to board an enemy flagship and face the most powerful ruler in the Dominion. A queen who had spent decades fighting against humanity. A queen whose hatred for his species was legendary. But the child in his arms trusted him completely, and somehow that made everything else seem less important. Daniel walked toward the shuttle with the princess in his arms. He did not look back at his fellow humans. He did not know if he would ever see them again. He only knew that he had started something that he had to finish. The shuttle doors closed behind him, and his fate was sealed. The royal flagship was like a city floating in space. Daniel walked through corridors that stretched for kilometers past thousands of going about their daily lives. He had expected to see only warriors and weapons. Instead, he saw families and children and artists creating beautiful sculptures. He saw musicians playing strange instruments that made sounds like weeping stars. He saw elderly teaching young ones in what looked like classrooms. This was not the enemy he had been taught to hate. This was a civilization as rich and complex as humanity itself. The royal guards escorted Daniel to a massive chamber at the heart of the ship. The ceiling was so high that it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with murals depicting the history of the people. And at the far end of the chamber, on a throne made of crystal and gold, sat Queen the Unconquered. She was ancient and enormous. Her carapace was covered with scars from centuries of battle. Her compound eyes glowed with an intelligence that made Daniel feel like an insect being examined under a microscope. 4 massive arms rested on the arms of her throne, and each one was decorated with rings of power. This was a ruler who had conquered star systems and destroyed fleets and watched generations of enemies turn to dust. Princess had finally released her grip on Daniel and was now standing beside her mother's throne. Medical attendants had treated her remaining injuries, and she looked much stronger than before. But she kept glancing at Daniel with those trusting golden eyes. Come forward, human, Queen commanded. Her voice was like thunder echoing through mountains. Let me see the creature who dared to touch my daughter. Daniel walked forward until he stood at the base of the throne. Every instinct told him to run. Every cell in his body screamed that he was in terrible danger. But he forced himself to stand straight and meet the Queen's burning gaze. I am Lieutenant Daniel Cole, he said, field medic. I saved your daughter because she was dying and I could not walk away. The Queen leaned forward slightly. I have studied your species for decades. I have learned your languages and your customs and your weaknesses. I know that humans are capable of great cruelty and destruction. Your kind killed my mate. Your kind killed 3 of my children. You have given me every reason to hate you with every fiber of my being. Daniel felt cold sweat running down his back. I am sorry for your losses, truly I am, but I did not kill your family. I am just a medic. I save lives. That is what I do." "And yet you wear the uniform of my enemy," the queen replied. "You serve on a warship that patrols our borders. You are part of the machine that has brought so much death to my people." "Yes," Daniel admitted. "I'm a soldier, I follow orders. But when I found your daughter in that crashed ship, I did not see an enemy. I saw a child who was hurt and afraid. I saw someone who needed help. My uniform did not matter in that moment. My orders did not matter. Only she mattered." The queen stared at him for a long moment. The silence stretched out until Daniel thought he might collapse from the tension. Then she spoke again in a voice that was slightly softer than before. "My advisors tell me that you used all of your medical supplies to save. They tell me that you worked for 20 minutes without rest. They tell me that your techniques were skillful and effective. You treated her as carefully as you would treat one of your own children." "She is a child," Daniel said simply. "That is enough." Queen leaned back in her throne. "You have created a problem for me, human. By saving my daughter and receiving her acknowledgement, you have invoked the ancient law of Ara. This law is sacred to my people. It cannot be ignored or dismissed." "What does this law require?" Daniel asked. "It requires that a life debt must be honored. You saved the life of the royal heir. Therefore you are owed a debt by the royal house itself. This debt must be repaid, or else you must be destroyed for stealing honor from the queen." Daniel's heart sank. "I did not ask for any debt. I do not want anything from you. I only wanted to save a child." "That does not matter," the queen replied. "The law exists whether you wanted it or not. You have two choices. You can refuse the debt and face execution, or you can accept the debt and swear an oath to serve my daughter until the debt is repaid." "Serve your daughter? What does that mean?" "It means you would become her guardian, her protector. You would live in the royal household and dedicate yourself to her safety and education. You would be bound to her by sacred oath until such time as the debt is considered paid." Daniel looked at Princess. She was watching him with hope shining in her golden eyes. She did not want him to die. She wanted him to stay. This strange alien child had already formed an attachment to the human who had saved her life. He thought about his own people. He thought about humanity and the Cold War and everything that had brought them to this point. He thought about the families on the flagship and the music and the art. He thought about how much both species had in common despite their differences. Maybe this was an opportunity. Maybe this was a chance to build a bridge between two civilizations that had only known fear and hatred. "I accept," Daniel said. "I will swear the oath." The queen's advisors gasped and murmured among themselves. War Commander, who had been standing in the shadows, made a sound of disgust and stormed out of the chamber. But Queen simply nodded as if she had expected this answer. "Then kneel, human. Kneel and speak the words of binding." Daniel knelt before the throne. The queen spoke ancient words in the language, and Daniel repeated them as best he could. The princess descended from the throne and placed her small hands on his head. A strange warmth spread through his body. The oath was sealed. "Rise, Daniel Cole," the queen said. "You are now bound to my house. May you not live to regret this choice." Daniel rose and looked into the queen's ancient eyes. He saw hatred there, but also something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or maybe the faintest spark of hope. He had just become the first human in history to join the royal household. Nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months had passed since Daniel swore his oath to the royal house. In that time, he had learned more about them than any human in history. He had learned their language and their customs and their ancient traditions. He had eaten their food and walked their gardens and listened to their music. He had become something that should have been impossible, a human living among the enemy as a trusted member of the royal household. Princess had become his constant companion. She followed him everywhere, asking endless questions about humanity and Earth and the strange customs of his people. She wanted to know about human food and human games and human stories. Daniel taught her everything he could, and in return she taught him about the. They had become friends despite every reason they should have been enemies. But not everyone in the royal court was happy about Daniel's presence. War Commander had opposed Daniel from the very beginning. He belonged to a faction of nobles and warriors who believed that humanity should be completely destroyed. They saw the Cold War as a mistake. They wanted total annihilation, and they saw Daniel as a dangerous symbol of weakness and compromise. Daniel had noticed the tension from his first week in the royal household. He saw the cold stares and heard the whispered insults. He knew that many considered him an abomination, a human living among them as if he belonged. The very idea offended their sense of pride and honor. But Daniel was careful. He watched and listened and learned. He paid attention to the political currents flowing through the court. He noticed which nobles met in secret and which advisors seemed nervous. He built a mental map of the factions and their loyalties. It was the same skill that had kept him alive on countless battlefields: awareness, observation, pattern recognition. That was how he discovered the plot. It happened late one night when Daniel was walking through the outer gardens. The gardens were usually empty at that hour, but Daniel heard voices coming from a hidden alcove. He moved silently through the alien plants until he was close enough to hear. War Commander was speaking with 3 other nobles. Their voices were hushed, but Daniel could understand every word. His months of study had made him fluent in the language. "The princess must die," said. "It is the only way to force the queen into total war. She will be devastated by grief and rage. She will finally unleash the full power of our fleets against humanity. The Cold War will become a hot war and we will crush them completely." "But how will we explain her death?" one of the nobles asked. "The queen will demand answers." "We will blame the human," replied. "We will make it look like he murdered her in her sleep. The queen will believe that her mercy was betrayed. She will order the immediate destruction of all human worlds. Our victory will be complete." Daniel felt his blood turn to ice. They were planning to kill. They were planning to murder a child to start a war, and they were going to frame him for the crime. He had to warn someone. He had to stop this. But who would believe him? He was a human, an outsider. If he accused powerful nobles of conspiracy without proof, he would be executed for slander. Would simply deny everything and Daniel would be dead before anyone could investigate. He needed evidence, he needed proof, and he needed help from someone he could trust. Daniel returned to the princess's chambers and found studying at her desk. She looked up with a smile when he entered, but the smile faded when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. "You look frightened." Daniel knelt beside her and spoke in a low voice. "I need to tell you something important, and I need you to be brave." He explained everything he had heard: the plot to kill her, the plan to blame him, the conspiracy to start a total war. Listened with wide eyes that slowly filled with fear and then with anger. "Has always hated my mother's caution," she said. "He believes that mercy is weakness, but I never thought he would try to kill me." "We need to tell your mother," Daniel said, "but we need proof first. Without evidence she might not believe us. Is a war hero. His word carries great weight." "I can help," said. "I know the ship better than anyone. I know where the nobles meet in secret. I know how to access the surveillance systems. We can find proof together." For the next week Daniel and worked in secret. They gathered recordings and documents and testimony from loyal servants. They built a case against and his conspirators. It was dangerous work. If they were discovered, then the plotters would simply accelerate their plans. Finally, they had enough evidence. Daniel requested a private audience with Queen. The Queen listened to his accusations with a face like stone. Her ancient eyes revealed nothing. When Daniel finished speaking, she remained silent for a long moment. "You accuse my most decorated war commander of treason," she said finally. "You accuse nobles of my own house of plotting to murder my daughter. These are serious charges, human. If you are lying, I will tear you apart with my own hands." "I am not lying," Daniel said. "The evidence speaks for itself." Stepped forward and placed her small hand on her mother's massive arm. "Mother, I was there when he discovered the plot. I helped gather the evidence. Daniel is telling the truth. He is trying to save my life again." The Queen looked at her daughter for a long moment. Then she turned to her guards. "Arrest War Commander and bring him to me in chains. We will investigate these accusations immediately." But they had waited too long. The conspirators had been watching. They knew they were discovered. That night the assassins came. Daniel was standing guard outside's chamber when he heard the sound of breaking glass. He burst through the door and saw 3 masked figures rushing toward the princess's bed. He did not hesitate. He threw himself between them and then fought with everything he had. He was one human against 3 trained assassins. The odds were impossible, but Daniel fought anyway. He kicked and punched and blocked. He used every combat technique he had ever learned. He bought precious seconds to escape through a hidden passage. Then he felt the blade slide between his ribs. The poison was immediate. Fire spread through his veins. His legs gave out and he collapsed to the floor. The assassins fled when they heard guards approaching. Daniel lay in a pool of his own blood as his vision began to fade. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Queen bursting into the room. Her ancient face was twisted with something he had never seen before. Fear for him. Then everything went black. Daniel floated in darkness for what felt like forever. He could hear distant voices and feel hands touching him, but he could not open his eyes or move his body. The poison was eating him from the inside. Every heartbeat pushed more venom through his blood. Every breath was a battle against the darkness that wanted to swallow him whole. The physicians had never treated a human before. They did not know which medicines would help and which would make things worse, but Queen had ordered them to save Daniel at any cost. She brought in specialists from across the Dominion. She opened her personal medical vaults. She demanded miracles and refused to accept failure. Princess never left his side. She sat beside his bed day and night holding his hand and talking to him even though he could not respond. She told him stories about her childhood and her dreams and her hopes for the future. She told him that he had to wake up because she was not finished learning about humanity. She told him that he was her guardian and he could not leave her now. On the seventh day, Daniel opened his eyes. The light was painfully bright at first. He blinked and squinted until the world came into focus. He was in a medical chamber surrounded by strange machines and physicians, was asleep in a chair beside his bed with her small hand still wrapped around his fingers. "You survived," said a voice filled with wonder. Daniel turned his head and saw Queen standing in the doorway. The physicians said it was impossible. The poison should have killed you within hours, but your human body fought it off. Your immune system adapted and evolved and refused to surrender. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. A physician helped him drink some water and he tried again. "The assassins," he croaked, "did you catch them?" "They are dead," the Queen replied, "and all his conspirators have been executed for treason. The threat is ended." Daniel closed his eyes with relief, was safe. The plot had failed. The war that wanted would not happen. Over the next few weeks, Daniel slowly recovered his strength. The physicians were amazed by how quickly his human body healed. They had studied his immune system and found it to be incredibly robust. Humans were fragile in many ways, but their ability to adapt and survive was remarkable. The physicians wrote papers about it. They called it the human persistence factor. When Daniel was finally strong enough to walk again, Queen summoned him to her private chambers. This was unusual. The Queen rarely met with anyone alone. Daniel entered the chamber and found her sitting beside a window that looked out at the stars. "Sit with me," she said. Her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. Daniel sat in a chair across from her. For a long moment neither of them spoke. They just looked out at the endless darkness of space. "I have spent decades hating your species," the Queen said finally. "I have ordered attacks and approved operations and watched humans die without remorse. I told myself that you were monsters, that you deserved everything that happened to you. It was easier that way, easier to hate than to question." "I understand," Daniel said. "We have done the same to your people. We have been taught to fear and hate since childhood. I did not expect to find art and music and families on your ship. I did not expect to find people." The Queen turned to look at him. Her ancient eyes seemed tired for the first time since he had met her. "You saved my daughter twice. The first time I could dismiss as accident or self-interest, but the second time you threw yourself between her and death. You nearly died to protect a child. No enemy would do that. No monster would sacrifice themselves for someone they hate." "She is just a child," Daniel said. "I told you that from the beginning. Nothing else matters when a child is in danger." "Yes," the Queen said. "That is what makes you remarkable. That is what I cannot ignore. You are forcing me to question everything I believed about humanity." She stood and walked to her window. Her massive form was silhouetted against the stars. "I want to propose something unprecedented. I want to send you back to human space as our first ambassador. I want you to speak for us, to explain who we really are, to open a dialogue that might lead to peace." Daniel felt his heart racing. "Peace? You would consider ending the Cold War?" "I would consider exploring the possibility. Has shown me what understanding between our species might look like. You have shown me that not all humans are my enemies. Perhaps it is time to find out if peace is possible." "I will do it," Daniel said without hesitation. "But I want to bring with me. Let humans see that are not monsters either. Let her be a symbol of what we might become together." The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "My daughter has already asked for the same thing. She wants to see Earth. She wants to learn about humanity firsthand. I will allow it, but you will protect her with your life." "Always," Daniel promised. 2 weeks later, Daniel returned to human space aboard a diplomatic vessel. Commander Lisa Grant nearly fainted when she saw the purple ship approaching with peaceful signals. The negotiations that followed were long and difficult and full of setbacks, but they were genuine. Both sides were trying. Years passed. The Cold War slowly thawed into careful cooperation. Trade routes opened. Cultural exchanges began. Grew from a child into a young leader who understood both species better than anyone. She became Queen's voice in human territories, and Daniel remained her constant advisor and guardian. When Queen finally died after centuries of rule took her place on the Crystal Throne, her first act as Queen was to formalize the alliance with humanity. She signed the treaty with a human pen that Daniel had given her years ago. After the ceremony turned to Daniel, she was no longer a child but a powerful queen. Yet when she looked at him, her eyes still held the same trust they had shown on that barren moon so long ago. "The oath is fulfilled," she said. "The debt is paid. You are free." Daniel smiled and shook his head. "I have been free since the day I chose to save you, but I am exactly where I want to be." "Then you will stay. You will always be family. I am not going anywhere." The queen embraced her human guardian. Outside the palace windows, the ships of two civilizations flew together in formation. Humanity and the former enemies, now allies, now friends. It had all started with one crashed shuttle and one injured child. One choice to help instead of hate. One act of compassion that changed the fate of two species forever. Daniel thought about the young medic he had been on that barren moon. He had not known what his choice would lead to. He had simply done what felt right. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes that was everything.